greetings to those who tune in on the YouTube audio or video. Thanks for being with us in that way. Very full room, very full heart after the music that we just heard. Grateful always to be the chapel presider and to have the privilege of speaking. I have a rotation of topics, and my topic this morning is the one word surrender. And I have wrestled with surrender this whole week. I have a plan, which is sort of 3 stopping points over really the journey of my life in relation to this topic. And I could almost, if I take my life timeline and just slice anywhere in, I could tell you about how in that period of time this has been a challenge. I find the invitation to surrender profound, and I find it also something I would tell you I don't know that I do well, except I will say if I were to measure any 5-year interval over that, I think over time, so with notable exceptions, I feel like I'm catching on. And I hope, God willing. Anyway, let's run the clock of Jack's life all the way back. I was 16 years old. My addiction was already very much in full bloom, but it had not yet gotten to the point of derailing my capacity to function in certain ways. And so I was using every day, but I was academically strong, and so I skipped my senior year of high school and went to college in a special program in New York City, which was an amazing gift to me, changed my life, made me a person who loved learning. And so I was in a small program for early entrance. All of us had skipped our senior year of high school and were in New York City studying from people who loved the material they were teaching. That was the requirement of the dean of the school, was that you couldn't teach in the freshman year program unless you were going to teach a thing that really continued to interest you. And so 2 of my teachers, Sarah Ruddick, who went on to become a very famous philosopher, and Larry Fuchsberg, who did not grow to extreme renown in his field, but was amazing, exposed me to the concept of hubris. I don't think I've ever really talked about hubris here, but probably a lot of you have heard the term, and maybe some have not. It's an ancient Greek term, and in the evolution of the use of the term, I'm told that actually it was originally a term for criminality. And that, in fact, the tragic events of our political landscape yesterday would be classified as an act of hubris. This is kind of senseless criminality. When people do horrible things, taking it upon themselves to sort of like either vigilante justice or, random acts of violence, that kind of thing, that would be what the term hubris would have been used for in early Greek society. But then, as the philosophers, Plato and Aristotle, and the playwrights, Sophocles, and Homer, not so much a playwright, but literary and philosophical tradition of Greece sort of ramps up, the idea of hubris, as I always thought it was pretending to the gods. Like this idea of thinking too much of ourselves. And I remember my mom, not that she was this much of a person with that, but she used to, they used to have these adages, old sayings, pride goeth before a fall, right? And that's the nature of hubris is, and it's correlated with nemesis, with a collapse or fall, is that you think you got this, no correlation with addiction, of course, and then the next thing you know, you end up in Magic Mountain in Warrensville, right? And that's later in the message. I don't know why I jumped ahead in my outline, but so in the classical tradition, Oedipus is one of the people who's looked at in the play by Sophocles, but also in the Iliad, Achilles, and Odyssey. These are people who in these stories think of themselves in ways that is unwise and more self-reliant than they should. And then in that same freshman year program, I was given the opportunity to read Shakespeare, and Macbeth and Lear were 2 of the plays we studied, and both Macbeth and Lear suffer from this the narcissistic blindness of thinking too much of oneself. And it causes terrible outcomes in these beautiful plays. So it's great when it's like literature on the screen, but it's awful when it's your own life. Like when all of a sudden your like nose is being rubbed in the dirt, and the only person you can sort of like blame is like, yeah, you have to, when you look, you're like, a lot of this is on me, right? And so surrender in the classical tradition would be surrender to humility and acceptance, right? Surrender to the smallness of one's scope and appropriate, like I learned in Alcoholics Anonymous, to think of humility as being right-sized. Surrender in the classical tradition would be to not have this grandiosity. Oh gosh, I'm preaching to myself this morning. Here I am. I was accused by my first wife of going to seminary for the open mic. And she knew me all too well. And here I am still doing it. Look at me. Lord help me. And so I was like, when I decided the stopping points I was going to stop in my life journey, I realized I picked like about 17-year intervals, so it's like locusts. But I wish I could tell you it's only every 17 years that this bothers me. But we're going to jump from Jack at 16 to Jack in his 34-ish era. And this is when I was in early sobriety and did this crazy thing. As an atheist, I decided to go to seminary. And I was an atheist in early recovery. The writing on the wall there, the 12 steps, were meaningful to me. I worked my way through the steps a couple times with a sponsor. And every time I got to steps 2, 3, 7, and 11, which are these supposedly the God steps, although in my mind they're all matters of spiritual significance. But I had to make the fudges on the invitation of faith in addiction recovery. And the one stark fact I could not explain was my own sobriety. Like, my own sobriety made no sense to me. So it was the seemingly evident intervention of a power greater than myself in my life, because I had tried to get sober myself, and I couldn't barely manage 24 hours. I mean, it was so embarrassing that the one time before my sobriety hit, I'm like, I'm going to do 24 hours, and I decided if I made it to midnight that counted. That's pathetic, right? But I couldn't even make it to midnight. At 10 o'clock, the same now deceased ex-wife that I was just reminding of the open mic joke said to me, "Oh, you sort of made it." And I was like, "Oh, thank God." And I remember getting the bottle off the fridge. And I remember two things about it. I remember the relief at not having to kind of white knuckle through to midnight, much less the next day. And I remember this deep sense of complete and utter defeat. I'm like, oh my God, I am completely in the grip of this. It was a moment of undeniable clarity about being addicted, way before I would hit treatment or anything like that. Not way before, a few months before I would come into Alcoholics Anonymous and Narcotics Anonymous and begin to find my way. So I was 28 years old at that point. I'd done the steps, gotten this idea of like, oh, the only faith I could see was that I had been able to go from drinking every day, not able to stop, to suddenly able to stop. And I could accord the 12-step programs to some degree with that. I was grudgingly praying every day, but not to anything. I felt like praying to a brick wall. And I went to seminary out of curiosity. I was like, I want to find whatever these people are talking about that is so ecstatic and wonderful and amazing. And sure enough, I kind of had look where I am today. Like it's a great story, I think. But why do I say that? It's because I became a student of what in the seminary I was studying they called Scripture. But now I've come to realize that what Christians call Scripture is a very narrow view that's very disregarding of other people's holy texts. So people say, the Bible. That's disrespectful of other people's texts that they view as just as sacred, right? And so I was taught to call the Hebrew Scriptures the Hebrew Scriptures, and I was taught to call what that community called the New Testament as the Christian Scriptures. So there are Christian Scriptures, there are Hebrew Scriptures, there are Islamic Scriptures, there are Hindu Scriptures, there are Buddhist Scriptures. There are sacred texts kind of associated with all the different wisdom traditions in large measure. The indigenous and tribal traditions don't so much have text, but they have stories. They have stories that are handed on. And this is how wisdom gets handed on, is through story and writing. And anyway, I became a student of the Hebrew scriptures and of the Christian scriptures. And so much so that I learned to translate Greek. I was really, really into it. And I really loved it. And it still informs who I am today. And one of my favorite things to look at in the Hebrew and Christian scriptures was in Judaism. My friend Jeff is going to read for us later, knows the word hineni, which is, yes, I will go. And there's this character in the Hebrew tradition, Abram. He starts out, his name is Abram, and then he gets renamed Abraham. And God asks him in that story to do a kind of like ridiculous things. And Abram is this character who is like weirdly compliant. He seems willing to do just about anything that the divine asks him to do in a way that is sort of unique, because Moses, when God asked Moses to do something, Moses is like, nah, you can't mean me. I'm pretty sure. I stutter. I'm not like, you must be my brother. You know, like, what? You know, like, and so the dynamic of refusal of call and the dynamic of acceptance of call is, to me, where surrender next hits me. I'm like, do I follow? And this is really relevant to the 11th of the 12 steps. In the 11th step, it says, we sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. This is the little part there, what knowledge of the divine will for us. And the willingness or power to follow the divine will is, to me, one of the places where surrender hits the road, the rubber hits the road. Am I willing to do what my sponsor says? Am I willing to do what my treatment team says? Am I willing to do what my very tiny amount of common sense says? I really don't have common sense, by the way. You can ask my current wife, and she will testify. I'm the smartest, dumbest person she knows. And I hate to admit it, but I kind of agree, because she is the most common sense of pretty much anybody I know. And let's not get lost on that. The willingness to submit to good counsel and wise authority is a part of the surrender deal. I recently pulled off the shelf a book that I came across in 2014 by a woman named Judith Orloff. I don't know if any of you know about Judith Orloff, but she's a very popular spiritual teacher. She and Ram Dass were somewhat connected. And anyway, she published this book, which I just love the title of. When it came out, I had to buy it, The Ecstasy of Surrender. What? But I think she's right on to something there, because there is a joy in deciding to become a follower, in allowing yourself to be led, because otherwise it's all on your shoulders, right? It's all, you got to figure it out. And so then, like, think about how much anxiety we talk about in our society today, and how much depression, mental health, all that sort of stuff. How could it not be that our correlation with high levels of anxiety and distress and addiction in our life come from incredible? We're sold this idea of self-reliance as the answer. We're given this impression in all kinds of ways that all you need is the right combination of medications and gambling apps and all that sort of stuff, and then you're going to figure it out. You're going to know how to navigate the world that we live in. And in fact, you're going to end up in the Bahamas, and you're going to go to Tahiti, and you're going to have to have Lexus, and you're going to, and some of you drive those things and go on those trips. Like, good for you, and unless you're putting them on your credit cards. But we don't valorize, we don't celebrate simple alignment in a humble way with a world that would provide for our needs. One of the great teachers around this sort of subject matter was Abraham Maslow and the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And one of the illustrations that Maslow used in terms about self-actualization was a garbage collector. And he was saying the garbage collector doesn't need to become a doctor or a lawyer, the old classic Jewish, your kids have to get this and that, do that. The garbage collector can be self-actualized, because if there is a sense of alignment and purpose and meaning, right, then, and sorry, I'm jumping all over the place, but I just spent 3 days with our grandchildren. I only had grandchildren through my second marriage. I thank God every day for giving me family that I didn't bring into the world myself. But, so I was with a 6 and 11-year-old girls. We didn't have their parents. Yay. And watching the children be, and watching what it does to me as I knelt next to Charlotte and said goodnight to her last night, kissed her goodnight, said I'm not going to see you in the morning because I leave early in the morning. And what her love for me and my love for her, like I totally could be the garbage collector, and if I had that's the thing. That's the most precious thing in my life is love. And in order to have more of that, I have to surrender to this stupid invitation of more and consumerism and power and, to sort of puff myself up in what I think of as the world's eyes and find terrible shame and emptiness because I'm never going to, there's always going to be somebody who's got it bigger, better, faster, more. How many Jeff Bezoses and, those other people at the stratosphere level, how many of them do we need in the world? And how many of them is there room for? And how close is that in reach for any of us? If we set that as our goal, we just decided to be in insufficiency pretty much until they lay us in the ground. Surrender. 16 classical, 34 biblical, 50-ish, I end up here. And surrender again rears its face in learning about addiction recovery in a clinical way. I'm a classical, biblical, clinical as my mental outline here. And I want to talk about what I learned from being here and working with you. Not you, but obviously the crop 16 years ago. I've been doing this for 16 years. It so continually becomes a crucial issue. All those things I was just talking about, but as a clinician, what I learned is, I'm going to pick on Father Bill for a minute. He was amazing, but he didn't get this one piece right. One of the reasons why other clinicians got mad at him is he did his work rogue. He would meet with a client and he would say, I know what you need to do. When the thing is, the psychologists, the addiction counselors, the family therapists, everybody had just cooked up a plan for him. It had nothing to do with what Father Bill's idea was. So then Father Bill would say to the young man, hey, you should go here and do this. And the young man would go back to the treatment team and say, hey, Father Bill said I should go do this. And the other clinicians would want to go stab Father Bill, tell him to shut up. Because he wasn't integrated in a team process. And what I do, I've had my hand slapped about that. I've been taught to surrender to the wiser wisdom of the treatment team in its discernment. So if I'm sitting there talking to this young man, I'm like, whoa, I wonder if, some next step on his journey would be wise for him. I don't know, I'm not even going to say anything to him until I talk to his primary therapist. I'm going to call his primary therapist and say, hey, and the primary therapist is going, oh, I love that idea. Or, no, we already told him, get on board, Jack, right? So, and those of you who are on this journey, family members and people in emerging recovery or resuming recovery, this is a message for you too, and those of you who are coming back, we have all these celebrants today who are coming back, and they can bear witness to this, the wisdom and the folly of it, right? So what you find out is that recovery flourishes when you're another bozo on the bus. I remember when I first heard that expression, it really offended me, but that's because I was all into my narcissistic bigness thing. What do you mean another bozo on the bus? I don't aspire to being another bozo on the bus. Today, I aspire to being another bozo on the bus, and I'm proud of it. When I'm another bozo on the bus, I'm hitting my stride. That's when my recovery, that's what my sponsors have tried to get to me, to get out of my own way and allow the activity of God to work in me and in others to bring about outcomes that are way beyond what I could bring about myself. Because if I'm deluded enough to think I can do better than the universe or the God of my understanding, that is delusional. That is essential hubris. I'll finish in just a minute, but I remember, it comes back to me. I had a patient when my office was over on this side, and it was a brilliant lawyer, attorney, highly successful, and we were having this wrestling match about the role of the divine in one's life. And he came in and he said, I know what I need to do, Reverend Jack. What about the idea of cooperating with God? And I'm like, okay, keep telling me. And he's like, I can do this and that and that, and I'm cooperating with the divine. And I said to him, I was in a smart aleck into it, I said, so you're telling me that you and God can do better than God can do alone? He got really messed at me and walked out. It's the attitude. I'm not saying that cooperation with God isn't a beautiful part of it, but it was the spirit that he was bringing, which is, I have to be in the game. I don't believe that. I mean, yes, okay, but I really believe there's this ultimacy of surrender. At some point, I have to take the ride. I have to let go of the wheel. I have to follow the chute. I have to get up at the mic and sing and let it take over me. I have to give in. And then the miracles will come. The grace will come. The flourishing will come in a way that when I'm like, I have to set up the chess pieces just right or it's not going to happen, it won't happen. Or it will not happen as extraordinarily as it will. If you just, then he said all the time, trust the process. And people are like, ugh. But why would it be being said in treatment for the last 70 years if it wasn't a thing there? If there wasn't a passion on the part of those of us who answer calling to come to places like this to work with you, the things that we repeat over and over are because we've become persuaded at some deep level that they work. And when I watch the person, like, I know what I need to do. I just need to go do it. I don't really need this. I don't really need that. I'm fine. I've got it figured out. I'm like, oh my God. I'm waiting for the... There's 10 things I didn't say about addiction as our nemesis, all that sort of stuff. If you're classical, give that a little thought. But anyway, the point is made, right? Oh, we do so much better when we get out of our own way and allow ourselves to move into the stream of flows that are around us, that are seeking to help have us flourish. And there's no way, if you've made it to this mountain, that that's not what's trying to happen. I totally believe by the time you get here, yeah, it's probably been awful, but this is the place where the turn emerges, where grace abounds, where the celebrations we're about to see can be yours. You can have the recovery you're about to see created in front of you as well. God bless. Thank you so much.